The Big 12 season awards came out on Sunday night, and Texas Tech fans are furious at the amount of snubs that the Red Raiders suffered. We're going to break down some of the most disgusting ones coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel already, please do so. I'm going to continue to say it until everybody does. It would greatly help out the channel. This episode of Locked On Texas Tech is brought to you by StatHero. StatHero is reshaping the way you play fantasy sports. Dozens of house-based games to play daily. No sharks, no funky props, just your skill versus the lineups you choose. Sign up today at stathero.com/lockedon. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News. I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst and writer. Emery, it feels like it's been a while since we've both been recording an episode at the same time, and I wish we were in a little bit of a better spirit today, but we've got to talk about some of the Big 12 awards because there are some atrocities on this list.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we just start up top talking about the Coach of the Year race? One that if you would have polled people a week ago, 100% of people would have thought Mark Adams was going to be Coach of the Year. And, I mean, at that point, it looked like Tech was in a good shot at getting at least a tie for second or maybe even first in the conference. You had Baylor. Obviously, at the time was still a game back at Kansas. And then obviously you had what Iowa State has been doing. But generally speaking, like people thought it was almost a foregone conclusion that Adams was going to win Coach of the Year Big 12, let alone nationally. It was kind of, he was in the top three. And then suddenly you get to tonight's awards and it just looks like Scott Drew was able to pull one off. And I kind of understand it. I mean, we'll get into kind of the merits of Scott Drew as a coach in a second, but I think first off, like Mark Adams doesn't need a Coach of the Year award to see just how great a job he's done. And sure, like the pure numbers don't look great when you look at the preseason expectations to now, depending on where you looked at the polls. It's anywhere to 1 to 3 spots better than what the media or the coaches expected preseason, but that doesn't tell the whole story of the phenomenal job he's done building this team in the same way that Scott Drew and Baylor's record doesn't do justice in terms of what his coaching job did. So I don't think this is as much about Scott Drew being in the wrong for winning Coach of the Year. I certainly think he's done an outstanding job at Baylor, but man, I mean, it's crazy how much just a couple late season losses changed what people think of Mark Adams because, like, I mean, I think you still have to make a good argument that he's National Coach of the Year. I mean, given how he was able to rebuild the roster in the 7-month period before the season, get everyone together, guys that people didn't really think were like preseason All-Americans or anything. It wasn't like Texas where you're bringing in Conference Player of the Years. So to be able to get this roster into that shape and not end up with a Big 12 Coach of the Year after sweeping Baylor, after winning 12 games, after going undefeated and throughout the season at home, it's ridiculous, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I really don't like this one at all. I think that I've been monitoring kind of National Coach of the Year this year, obviously trying to figure out just what the pulse is and where a guy like Adams would rank in that. And so obviously you've got some prime candidates there, right? Tommy Lloyd has done a phenomenal job at Arizona. Ed Cooley leading a Providence team that won its first Big East championship and defeated Texas Tech in the process. But there's just this race, like the Big 12 race specifically, is very surprising to see Scott Drew over Mark Adams. And like I understand the rationale to a degree. Like Baylor lost a number of players, and they've had some injuries this season, and you know they're one of the Big 12's best teams. But I feel like this is just kind of an honorary award based on what's happened last few seasons with Baylor. Like Scott Drew is a guy that is respected, but is also really liked around this conference. Like uh, Bill Self is really respected, but there are a number of people who do not like Bill Self, and we'll talk about it openly. But Drew's like a good guy. Like he's a really good guy. He's friendly, he's kind, he's hardworking, and he knows the game of basketball really well. And so I understand why he's in this position, but I think when you look at both resumes, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me to have him over Adams right now. Primarily because I think that Texas Tech's roster suffered significantly more turnover than Baylor's did. I mean, you retained the two best players that you retained from your last year roster were fifth and sixth in minutes played this season because they were hurt so much. Terrence Shannon Jr. played 501 minutes this year. That is nuts. That is not a lot. And so I understand the injury argument. Scott Drew is deserving. I probably would have had him second over TJ Otzelberger just because I don't think that what Iowa State did this season was that impressive. It was obviously a lot better than getting skunked in conference play again, but I just kind of feel like this was Mark Adams' award, and I'm surprised to see that he didn't win it.
Here's the thing. I'm going to go in and say that a lot of people have underrated what Baylor's had to go through this season. And I think that that carries a fair bit of weight. And within the conference, I can understand the rationale behind people thinking that what Scott Drew did was an exceptional job. And you look at what they were able to do down the stretch of Big 12 play with really all three of their guards dealing with some variation of injury. You had obviously JTT getting hurt and missing the rest of the year. And being able to get into a share of the conference championship was pretty impressive. And I mean, at the end of the day, like we're talking about minute things here. Scott Drew, in my opinion, had more to work with, like you mentioned, coming into the year. He had a couple of returning pieces: Matthew Meyer, JTT, Flo Thamba, obviously Adam Flagler, like we mentioned, and then you also had probably a little bit more of an intriguing freshman class coming in with obviously Sohan and Kendall Brown. But still, like with the amount of injuries he had to go through, I can understand why he was coach of the year. I think that if it wasn't for what Mark Adams did with this Texas Tech roster, you would say a lot of years he would be able to take coach of the year. Like I look at a situation like 4 years ago or 5 years ago, like 2017-ish. A lot of those years where it was like Kansas winning the conference by 1 or 2 games, no real like standouts from the middle of the pack, I would say, yeah, sure, give the coach of the year to Scott Drew for getting into the share of the Big 12 championship and sort of managing the injuries. But I think this year you have what Otzelberger did at Iowa State, which was impressive in being able to get the roster out of the barrel. Like you mentioned, I think it's easier to go from complete bottom of the conference, bottom of the Power Five, to being a mid-pack conference team than it is to go from being a mid-pack conference team to a top-tier team. But that's another argument for another day, and he was certainly worthy as well. But man, I mean, Mark Adams, just the signature wins that he had this year, like the 12-6 record in conference doesn't do it justice, because you look at a team that managed to sweep the defending national champions in Baylor, and not only that, but sweep a team that really, like throughout the season, was ranked ahead of them. They beat Kansas at home without your two returning best players from last year. And you also picked up a big win over Tennessee. You swept Texas in the Chris Beard rivalry. And you did all of these things. And just to not end up with Coach of the Year, it's frustrating. And again, I get why Scott Drew won. I don't think this is as big of an injustice as some people are making it out to be, because Scott Drew, TJ Otzelberger, obviously Mark Adams, to some degree Jamie Dixon as well. Like all of those guys had coaching years that in a lot of times would be up towards being Coach of the Year type tier. But at the end of the day, it sucks because Mark Adams should have won the award. I think we all know that, but move on. And hopefully we get some redemption when it comes to the national Coach of the Year race.
Quick fire question, give me a yes or no. If Texas Tech beats TCU or Oklahoma State, does Mark Adams win Coach of the Year?
Yes.
Okay. Interested.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I think if you literally split those games and you come within a game of Baylor and Kansas, that changes the calculus a little bit.
Yep, I completely agree with you, and I'm sure that nobody wants those games back more than Mark Adams, and probably not for the sake of the award, but for the sake of just continuing to win basketball games. We've got to talk about Bryson Williams not winning Big 12 Newcomer of the Year. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance, props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. March Madness is just over 1 week away. That means you need to start thinking now about where you're going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going for the usual or are you looking for the best? We've done our homework here and we're running brackets with RunYourPool.com. Along with standard brackets, RunYourPool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X. They have options to edit scoring and they offer more intel to make your picks, all stuff you're not going to find at ESPN or CBS. Clearly, we believe in Run Your Pool because, like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter Pure Madness at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize. We look forward to seeing and beating you there. Thanks again for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Be sure to check out the Locked On Bracket Breakdown March 14th right here on the Locked On Texas Tech podcast feed and YouTube channel. College basketball experts Chris Gordy, Andy Patton, and betting expert Lee Sterling give you in-depth breakdowns on every matchup. It'll be the second time that Andy Patton ends up on our podcast feed. Good dude. He's going to have a lot of good stuff to say on that show. But for now, we are focused on Bryson Williams not winning Big 12 Newcomer of the Year, which was a little surprising to me, especially when you look at the all Big 12 teams. He is the only Texas Tech member or player to crack any of the top 3 all Big 12 teams. He was a unanimous first teamer, obviously unanimous all newcomer team, and the Newcomer of the Year ends up going to Isaiah Brockington of Iowa State. Emery, what did you think about this one? Do you think that it was a greater snub than Mark Adams or somewhere in the middle?
I think it was less of a snub. I think out of all of the awards that you could argue that Tech got snubbed out of, I would say that this is the most defensible. And for me, I guess it's a little bit of an optical discussion because I would say that if you're looking at overall like first team, second team, third team, usually those are more team dependent and team success dependent. And I think that's why people saw the amount of success that Bryson Williams had on Texas Tech and saw the success that Texas Tech had. And there's really no reason Bryson Williams couldn't be on the first team, which is why it was a unanimous selection. When it comes to the Newcomer of the Year, though, and you have Brockington, he was the engine for Iowa State's offense for a good portion of the year. I mean, the roster without him really just did not have a lot of self-creation. And, I mean, you look at the impact he had a stretch of games in the Big 12, which really sort of fueled them to the tournament. If they dropped those games for Brockington, had a string of, I think it was 4 straight games of 20 or more, then it's very likely that they don't end up on the tournament or at a minimum are sweating it out come Selection Sunday. So for him to come up with those performances, he averaged over 17 for the year. He was pretty efficient while doing it and took on a lot of ball handling responsibilities as well. So you have all of that going for him. And Bryson Williams had an exceptional season. He had the game in Allen Fieldhouse, which I thought was probably one of the best games we've seen a Tech player have in the last decade. And in general, he was really the main ignition for Tech's offense, to a fault at times. But certainly he was really relied upon and was very efficient. But Brockington just took on so much of the load as a guard for Iowa State. And I feel like it's kind of the like feel-good story of him coming in kind of single-handedly changing the tide of the program alongside their coach and alongside sort of a couple other guys like Tyrese Hunter, for example, that sort of swung the momentum. Like, I think Bryson Williams, if it was up to me, would have won the award. But at the same time, Brockington's at least a defensible pick because he did have some efficient moments. His volume throughout conference play was really impressive. And, I mean, it is what it is. I don't have as much of an issue with this as some of the other picks that we'll get into later.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting kind of like subset that we could talk about here, and just issue that gets talked about a lot about awards, specifically whenever people are talking about like MVP and what does it mean to truly be the most valuable player. And while that's not necessarily what we're considering here, I do think that when you look at what Brockington provided for this Iowa State team, it's unquestionable that he might have been the most valuable player on a team in the Big 12 this year. I mean, just thinking about what Iowa State would have looked like without him this year is unthinkable. I mean, this is a team that scored 36 points in a game. And to imagine what you would do whenever you're taking away a guy that averaged 18 points per game in conference play, it's pretty terrifying, honestly, if you're an Iowa State fan or if you're a TJ Otzelberger fan. I think that Brockington, man, it's a good pick. I wish that it wasn't, because I really like Bryson Williams. I thought he had a heck of a year. I'm really glad that he is a Red Raider, and I thought that he made the most out of his singular season here. But very hard to contest with the Brockington pick. Let's take a quick look at the other three All Big 12 teams. There are no Texas Tech members on any of the other three teams. Four Red Raiders made honorable mention: Adonis Arms, Kevin McCullough, Kevin O'Banner, and Marcus Santos Silva. Are there any players on that list that surprise you, or any snubs from that list that surprise you?
Okay, I think David McCormick making third team All Big 12 was absolutely ridiculous. When you have a guy that got benched halfway through the season, was a net negative in a good amount of the conference games that he played, is relatively inefficient for his size at the rim, and whenever Kansas is running their best lineup, it doesn't involve him. It makes no sense for him to be on a conference team, and I don't think he should have necessarily been replaced by a Tech guy. I think it's just kind of the way that the season worked out for them that it ended up being that they had so many honorable mention guys, because guys like McCullough, you could say, well, he missed too many games, and that would be kind of a valid excuse, because I don't think McCullough really was as impactful as someone that would be like on a Big 12 team in spite of injuries. I think if I was doing my own personal ballot, I would have taken that into consideration. I think you could say Arms and O'Banner kind of had their inconsistencies at times, and Santos Silva just purely off a roll. If you look at the analytics for Santos Silva, he would easily be on the all conference team. But at the end of the day, like, you can't have any of the, like, all of those guys have valid reasons as to why they're not on. But having McCormick on a Big 12 team, I think, is ridiculous. I think Avery Anderson's another kind of questionable decision as well. Like, again, inefficiency for Oklahoma State. It's the same sort of argument. Like, when you have a guy that at times is actively hurting his team, and this time it isn't like something that was like a 3 or 4 game stretch. This was the whole conference season. Avery Anderson struggled with efficiency, and he didn't really put up the volume numbers either to really be able to justify that take. And even on the back end, I thought Jalen Wilson was maybe a little bit of a questionable choice. I think certainly he heated up in conference play. And if I remember correctly, Big 12 teams are primarily focused on what happens during conference season. But still, I mean, the third team for me was the big point of contention. I think the first team, they got all five right. Outside of, I personally would have had Flagler over Akinjo, but that's also me being biased towards Adam Flagler, as I've mentioned numerous times on here. And I think the second team is almost perfect outside of that one aforementioned sub. But man, the third team, just having McCormick on there and to a lesser degree having Avery Anderson on there is just ridiculous to me.
I got a hot take about the first team.
Go for it.
Mike Miles over Kinjo.
I think it's fair. I would have had Flagler over him, but you could go with Mike Miles. I think the thing about Akinjo is there were certain games this year where he carried Baylor's offense. I think having Flagler and Cryer banged up for a significant amount of the year played a lot into that. But I also think the inconsistencies that he has as a guard are really, they're tough to ignore, especially against a guy like Mike Miles. And again, I think at their peaks, I like Flagler more than I like Akinjo. But certainly, I mean, I think you could go either way with that.
Miles games against Texas Tech and Kansas that led to two monster wins for TCU, essentially sealing their place in the tournament, is why he would have my vote for first team. I think that he was a brilliant player for most of the Big 12 season, but those 2 games, he just turned it on when it mattered most, and so he gets my vote there. Other than that, I'm with you. Most everything checks out. I'm really interested to know who voted for Marcus Santos Silva, not because I think it's wrong. In fact, I kind of think it's like especially right. Like, talk about a guy that's providing value for you even when he's not showing up in the box score. Just am really interested to see who voted for him. But nonetheless, maybe we'll know eventually, maybe not. In the meantime, we've got to talk about this all Big 12 defensive team, as upset as it's going to make me. But first, a word from our sponsors. I love March Madness and bracket contests, but I can't remember the last time I actually went deep and won any money. I'm hedging my bets this year with StatHero. StatHero's NCAA single pick'em games pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. StatHero gives you the advantage, resulting in the gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because StatHero eliminates the mystery about who or what you are going up against. StatHero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. StatHero. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not a resolution because I actually enjoy eating Built Bar products. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They are low in calorie, high in protein. Replace your favorite candy bars with these, they are better. Go to Built.com and scroll down the macros chart, you're going to be blown away. They are high in protein, low in calorie, high in fiber, and low in carb. Go to Built.com today to get your hands on some of your own. All right, we've talked the Mark Adams Coach of the Year snub. We've discussed maybe if Bryson Williams should have been Newcomer of the Year. But now I think it's time for us to discuss where I know you and I kind of have some issues on different things, but the all Big 12 defensive team is not good. It is not good, and that's displayed most in the fact that 3 dudes won Defensive Player of the Year in this conference, which doesn't make sense. Like, I don't want to do the Rothstein bit, but like, why are there 3 dudes winning 1 award? It doesn't make sense to me. And then the defensive team, it's all over the place, man. And I've got a bone to pick about Malik Wilson, but I understand the counter argument against why Wilson isn't here. But even without that, I feel like there's a lot that is just not good here. Emery, get the ball rolling for us. What do you see on here that you do not like?
Well, first off, you've literally got a player in Jonathan Chamachachua who isn't even top 3 on his own team in pretty much any defensive metric you look at, whether it be Evan Maya's stats, whether it be DBPM. You look at his block rate, it's nothing exceptional. Thamba beats him there. Then obviously you look at the lineup stats, and they literally posted a better defensive rating over the last 5 games when he was out due to injury, which is another point. He missed 5 games. Like, I really feel bad for him. I think he's an integral part to what they do as a team. I think his rebounding is really good. But at some point, when you miss almost a third of the conference season and you were really more of a situation rotation player than like a star player getting a lot of minutes in Chamachachua's case, it just makes it so difficult for him to be any sort of player of the year. And defensive player of the year, it's just not what he's good at, you know? Like, for me, the strength of Baylor's team on defense has almost always been in their wings with a Kendall Brown association with a Matthew Meyer. Like, all of those guys are really versatile. And then you have Thamba's rim protection, even though he's kind of a little bit of a liability on the perimeter. But all of those guys, I feel like literally every single one would have been a better pick for all defensive first team than Chamachachua. And he made it and won Player of the Year. That is probably the strangest pick I've ever seen. Then you've got the guards, which, I mean, I kind of get seeing DeJuan Harris and Marquise Noel on the team. Like, both of those guys are kind of pesky on-ball defenders. But I really just, I mean, it's frustrating to me because it makes me wonder what the Big 12 coaches that voted on this really saw in each of these guys. Because for me, I look at Noel and I look at DeJuan Harris, and both of those guys from an off-ball perspective in terms of matchups, like they're not some of the stronger defenders in the conference. I would say a guy like Damian Ball from TCU is a better guard defender than either of those guys. And I feel like the tape backs that down more than the pure steal stats. And I mean, for both of those, I kind of get the rationale, but Shama Chachua should not have been on there. I think Gabo Savoy, and I've talked about him a lot, as a wing defender, he's about as good as they come in the country. And I completely get him getting defensive player of the year or whatever, but and obviously Musa Cisse, I mean, we saw on Saturday what he can do. He's a really good rim protector. Maybe a little bit overvalued if you just look at the pure block numbers. I think that sometimes those numbers get a little bit inflated by just how much of a rock fight type team Oklahoma State is, and in some ways the amount of rim penetration that they give up. But certainly, Cisse, I understand his argument, but I mean, it's the two guards and especially Jonathan Chamachachua for me that just, it does not make any sense.
Malik Wilson had 5 more blocks and 17 more steals than JTT this season. And JTT is the conference player of the year.
Malik Wilson is literally third nationally in DBPM.
Over the defensive player of the year and Walker Kessler and Chet.
Yeah.
And Chet.
And DBPM is traditionally a stat that gets inflated for bigs as well. And even then, JTT was not even close to the top of the conference if you look at DBPM. And I get that that's looking at counting stats, but you don't need to watch, like, you don't need to look at the counting stats. You can just literally watch the games. I know I'm going to sound like one of those, like, oh, you don't know ball type people, but literally, like, JTT, there's nothing about him that would scream defensive player of the year. Like, if you want to give him like 6th man of the year if he was coming off the bench, or if you want to talk about his importance, I'd even say it like he would be an underrated third team selection, but you just can't have him as a defensive player of the year. Like, it's an injustice. I get the argument against Malik Wilson. I've talked about how I feel like if he played 70% of Tech's minutes, he would be in contention for defensive player of the year nationally. I won't back down from that. I think in terms of conference teams, there's a valid reason for him not to be on the team. I think it's just minutes played. But then again, Osaboyan wasn't particularly egregiously heavy in minutes played either. If I remember correctly, he was sub 60%. So like you've got these contrasts, and just like the rest of the team, sure, but just seeing JTT on there and no Tech players in general, like it's not even Malik Wilson. Like you could take Nadomli, you could take Kevin McCullough. I mean, McCullough did miss some games, but so did JTT. And you're talking about a guy that's a national semifinalist for Defensive Player of the Year, someone that is one of the better off-ball defenders in the nation. And then you've also got other guys. You got Davion Moore, and if you want a pure on-ball guy, certainly one of the better, quicker hands and quicker reflexes in the conference. Like, I just don't know what they were doing there. That's my take on it. Like, JTT, no hate to the dude. I think he's an outstanding guy, outstanding player, but just him being on the defensive team it's crazy.
I just don't get it. Like I really don't. I mean, in terms of counting stats, it doesn't make sense. In terms of film, like are we giving dudes defensive player of the year now for being able to like switch on ball screens? If that's the case, then like why is it Marcus Silva on this list? Like honestly.
Like, if we're giving it for switching bigs, then why have we not been giving it to? Why have we not put Santos Silva on the team? And why are we not giving it to the bigs at both Texas and Texas Tech? And even, to be honest with you, like even a team like TCU, I feel like does a better job of switching if you're just looking at how their bigs switch than Baylor. One of the keys to Baylor's late season run has been the amount of minutes that they're running small ball with Sokan at the 5 and kind of being forced to run small. And you can see the improvements they've made in switching. Like, if we're just looking at the eye test and looking at switchability, JTT is not the guy that I think would win out there. If you're looking at counting stats, doesn't win there. If you're looking at rim protection, I could probably name 8 or 9 better rim protectors in the conference alone. Like, that's out of all of the selections this year, you could say Scott Drew Coach of the Year. I can kind of understand that if you're just looking at what he had to overcome. You're obviously Brockington, we've got into him. If you're looking at Player of the Year, Agbaji makes sense. If you're looking at pretty much any other selection, even David McCormick on third team conference, do I agree with it? No. But I think that there's at least some avenue. But I don't even think you could say, oh, it's a reputation pick for JTT because he's never been reported as that good of a defender. It's not one of those things where he's got the Osaboyan reputation or back in the day, a Mark Vidal type reputation. No, he's just an effort guy, a hustle guy that's really good on the boards, can switch okay, I guess, and isn't a liability. That's what I would say about his defensive ability.
It's not a good pick. Everything else on this team, I'm fine with Cisse. Obviously, like you mentioned, I think the counting stats are really, really high here, and that's obviously going to be one of the main ways that these awards are selected, and so that's a pick that makes sense. I think that he's a good shot blocker anyways. Osaboyan, yeah, I'm fine with that, just in terms of his versatility and what he does. Marquise Noel, I actually kind of like this pick. I think that he was a little bit of an underrated on-ball defender, had really, really good hands, obviously struggled a little bit in off-ball and also just keeping up on switches because the dude's really, really small. He's really, really small, but his hands are really good. He had a steal rate that was higher than Malik Wilson's, which is not easy to do this season. And I don't like the DeJuan Harris pick. Just honestly, I don't get it. The counting stats are there, but the dude has played so many minutes that when you look at it from a rate stat standpoint, he's middle of the pack, and he's a liability off the ball. He's a liability on switches. I don't like that pick. Not very much at all.
Yeah, I think Harris is a bigger injustice than Noel. I think Noel is probably one of the 3 or 4 best on-ball defenders in the Big 12. And certainly, if you're just looking at process of elimination, most of the other guys that are up there that could maybe be better off the ball are guys that didn't really play enough minutes or weren't in a role. K-State really relied on him as a point of attack defender. And so I kind of get that, even though it's not really what I would look at in terms of evaluating my favorite defenders. But DeJuan Harris, there's a number of guards in the Big 12 that I feel like we're probably more deserving of that. I mean, even we've talked about Akinjo, but I think he would be a reasonable pick for Baylor. Obviously, Matthew Meyer. If you want to look at rate stats, Meyer's up there, even though I'm not sure the eye test really backs that up as much. And then obviously Malik Wilson, Davion Warren from Tech. You've got guys like Marcus Carr at Texas. I mean, Damian Ball, I already mentioned at TCU, and just really a couple other guys like Micah Peavy, even I thought could have had an outside shot at that. And so for DeJuan Harris to get it, I guess they kind of figured, hey, Kansas needs at least one person on this team. They won the conference. Their defense is not all that good, but hey, I mean, DeJuan Harris gets a few steals every once in a while. So, and he's a decent on-ball defender. So let's just give him a all first team Big 12 defense honor.
It's bad, man. Awards are stupid, honestly. Those are my closing thoughts. Awards are really, really dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should just settle this all on the court, one-on-one king of the court style. You get 5 best defensive records, they end up getting the all-conference team. Let's just do away with coaches voting on anything. Just do away with voting in general. No coaches preseason poll, no media poll, no anything. Just on the court, all results.
Mark Adams would definitely win in 21 against Scott Drew and TJ. There's not a chance, man.
Oh, he fought a bear. You can do anything.
That's right.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Well, thank you all for tuning in to our Big 12 season awards recap. We are sorry to be the bearer of bad news and just deliver the fact that Texas Tech has gotten absolutely snubbed on some of these awards. But luckily, our tone will be a little bit more positive as the week goes on, as we will be beginning to look at the Big 12 tournament. Texas Tech and Iowa State will match up on Thursday. We will begin our coverage in that game, taking a look at what Texas Tech has done in the past against the Cyclones and what they can repeat. So be sure that you are keeping up with us wherever you listen. subscribe to our feed, leave us a review if possible. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not already. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eracer41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at Locked On TTU. Thank you all for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.